Friday EGROW webinar series that we have for nearly 2 years. As you know that the EGROW Foundation is a research-based policy advisory think tank, and we believe in good research before making any policy recommendations. For the last 2 years, we have had series of talks under the same context of policy making in India. We've also recently had series of talks on India's economic reforms, where we were able to get the best minds in our country to come and speak to us about reforms. That included Monte Carlo, N.K. Singh, and of course our chairman, Dr. Arvind Virmani, and Mr. Panagaria. We have also been very fortunate to have speakers from across the world speak to us, including two Nobel laureates. The objective of the webinar series is to bring in the best minds from across the world to talk to us about policy-oriented research and research-based policy advice, and talk about issues which are contemporary and burning. It is in this very context that we have invited Professor Pulapre Balakrishnan, second time on our website, on our webinar series, to come and speak to us on contemporary issues. Professor Balakrishnan has just come out with a book, India's Economy from Nehru to Modi, and this has been published by Ashoka University. And this is a brief history, about a 240 pages book, and the book starts from actually pre-Nehru times, in the sense it talks about the philosophy of reforms and why the reforms, and then covers almost, and I call it a brief history. The book, of course, is titled Brief History, and it covers the complete spectrum of economic thought. And I think it's a must read for any student of Indian economy. Covers starting from Mr. Nehru, covers Prime Minister Gandhi, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, then Manmohan Singh, Narasimha Rao, and then, of course, covers even Modi to a great extent. Let me first introduce you Professor Pulapre Balakrishnan before we go and talk about the book. Professor, requesting everybody, please switch off your, please silent your mics, please. Okay. So Professor Balakrishnan is currently a professor of economics at Ashoka University, and he was educated at Moscow, Chennai, and New Delhi, and trained as an economist at University of Oxford and University of Cambridge. His published work spans the inflationary process in the Indian economy, productivity growth in manufacturing, for which he is known across the world for an expert on manufacturing in our country, the macroeconomics of the transition to a market economy in Ukraine, agriculture involvement in involution in Kerala, and economic growth in India. He has written in professional journals and is the author of books like Pricing and Inflation in India and Economic Growth in India, History and Prospect. Professor Balakrishnan has held appointments at the University of Oxford, the Indian Statistical Institute, Delhi Center, and the Indian Institute of Management, Kozhikode. He has served as a country economist for Ukraine at the World Bank and been a consultant to the International Labour Organization, the Reserve Bank of India, and the United Nations Development Programme. He has over 2 decades participated in the public discourse on India's economy via his popular writings. He is a recipient of the Malcolm Adisesha Award for distinguished contribution to development studies. We are very fortunate when we requested Professor Balakrishnan to come and discuss the book with us. He agreed, and then we thought we will have it in the style of a conversation, so that I have read the book. It's a brilliant book, and it's a very concise book. It's very difficult to capture the history of Indian economic story, Indian economic growth in just 240 pages. And he has done it exceedingly well. So we are going to engage in a discussion, and we are going to talk about the contents of the book and where to go about. But before I start, Professor, would you have any initial remarks to make, or can I start directly? Professor Balakrishnan?
You are on mute, Professor.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can hear me now, I suppose?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Charan, for that very generous introduction. I mean, it's over generous. That's about all I can say, but thank you so much indeed. And I'm delighted to be at the EGROW webinar a second time, as you pointed out. I have nothing by way of initial remarks to make. I'm delighted to be here and in your hands, really, in the sense that you're my host, and I'm happy to have a discussion.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now, one thing I wanted to talk to you is your opening chapter, the introductory chapter. And in the introductory chapter, actually, you lay the context and you say philosophically, and you bring in the philosophers of our time and say, what should be the reforms aiming at? What is the purpose of economic policy? And what is the objective of macroeconomics? Um, and of course, you focus on saying that, of course, the quality of life has to improve. Would you share some thoughts about this with us before
Sure.
we take a deep plunge into how the prime minister is performed and we look at their evaluation?
Yeah, absolutely, Charan. I'm happy to do that, and I'm happy you've given me this opportunity. Let me just mention that a minor correction. The introductory chapter is not so much about the reforms or the various stages of India's economic growth and the policies adopted that time. It's a generic description of how we should view development.
Exactly.
And if you wish, also the India that was to come after independence. And I talk about of course, I start with Nehru's view and what was promised in 1947, which, by the way, I believe is a very important element of how we should assess where we are today. We should assess where we are today in 2022 in terms of what we as a collective had in mind in 1947. And I believe that Nehru's views at that time reasonably well captured the view of the collective, i.e., of the vast majority of Indians. And I also look at the ideas of Isaiah Berlin, the philosopher, on freedom, and make this point to this distinction that he makes between positive and negative freedom, which is discussed in the book. So I won't dwell on that. And then I finally go on to talk about how Sen developed upon this idea of positive and negative freedom and, kind of reposition development as human development, so to speak, or as Sen says, the expansion of freedoms, which is development is when people have the freedom to lead their lives according to their, if not wishes, lead the kind of life that they value. So that is the introductory chapter. It's not so much by way of a prelude to the reforms, as you said, but really emphasizes that we should assess India at 75 in terms of what was promised in 1947, which was largely a fulfilling life. That's, of course, Nehru's terms or words, fulfilling life for every man and woman, broadly interpreted today globally as human development. So that's the introductory chapter as I had intended it.
Yeah, I like the way you brought in Nehru there, and you said on 15th August 1947, he pointed out that independence was but a step to the ending of poverty and ignorance and disease and inequality of opportunity. And as I see through the rest of the book, then you do talk about education, and as you rightly put it, Amrita Sen talking about capabilities. So I think then the book develops and then measures and evaluates on various parameters, but basically looking at poverty and capability in terms of education. And of course, you discuss a lot in the book about Piketty and income inequalities. So very enriching from that angle. Let's let's look at the Nehruvian era. And as we know, and as it's etched in the minds of most of us, the Nehruvian era basically was the temples of modern India. And it involved industrialization. And you have spoken about Mahalanobis, the physicist, who was given this task of now developing a model for the country. And somewhere in your book, I was getting a feeling that Mahalanobis was too mathematical and he was able to quantify it. And in that quantification, the quality of life that should have developed was lost. Now, I was wondering if you would like to share some of your thoughts during the Nehruvian era, and that is the longest prime minister that India has had. Actually, and, of course, he took over the reins from the British, and then he was there with us till 1964. So the longest tenure that any prime minister had. So, would you like to share some thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, Charan, just a small thing that I want to say, since you mentioned this point about mathematical. While the Mahalanobis model, of course, is a mathematical model, that's absolutely correct. It's a very simple mathematical model and very intuitive too. What is it saying? It is saying that since there are two types of goods in the economy, consumption goods and capital goods go into the production of consumer goods and themselves. So therefore, if you initially invest more in capital goods, in the long run, you will have more capital goods and you would also have a higher level of output rather than if you would invest more in consumption goods for a start. So that was a model, and it is correct that the second five-year plan brought that into reality in some ways with heavy investment or increased investment in the heavy goods sector. But at the same time, I must say that Mahalanobis himself didn't put excessive emphasis on the model. As I state, he really believed that planning was much more than that, and he did have a certain idea of planning, and that really conforms quite closely to what the economist Sukhamoy Chakravarti, the late Sukhamoy Chakravarti, referred to as the Nehru-Mahalanobis strategy, which was basically a strategy of trying to revive the economy by investing in various sectors. And heavy industry was only part of it. So, and of course, please remember that some of the first investments were in irrigation and electricity generation, Bhakra Nangal being the most best known aspect of that. Then, of course, in the east, there was Hirakud, and all of this was, and the Damodar Valley Corporation, etc. So, in some ways, it would be wrong to think of the planning to have been excessively focused on industrialization. Industrialization was part of the strategy, but it certainly also focused on reviving Indian agriculture, which are done particularly badly under the Raj, especially the last 50 years of the Raj. And one of the things that people don't realize sufficiently, the sector, interestingly enough, that responded most to the economic policy and the efforts of the time with the agricultural sector. Now, the final point about the model being mathematical and therefore missed out on other things. Yes, I would say that in some ways, if not the model, the Nehru-Mahalanobis strategy seems to have underemphasized schooling. And that is a point that I come back to repeatedly in the book. If you look at East Asia, the broad model that they followed was not very different from what we followed. It would be called import substituting industrialization. But along with that, they invested very heavily in schooling, school education. And that is what made the difference. And that is where we missed out, I think, very seriously in terms of an opportunity. And in a sense that has never really been made up maybe over time we went excessively in the direction of higher education while neglecting schooling. And in some ways, we're paying the price for it.
You know, one thing reading this book, I myself was surprised when I noticed, and you said that Nehru himself was quite knowledgeable and familiar with agriculture.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah, and I was,
Sorry,
my
Charan.
own,
Please finish. Please finish.
my own thoughts were that Nehru was obsessed with industrialization. But as you very correctly brought it out and said, during that time, the 50s, grow more food, quote unquote, grow more food in the 50s.
Correct.
And Indian politicians were talking about it, and as you've written it so well, Nehru himself displayed a knowledge of agriculture, such as of crop yields in India compared to elsewhere in the world, that would be the envy of present day politicians. So we always thought that, Nehru was too possessed with what happened in the freedom struggle, and then he had to bring in industrialization. But then your book gives a balance that no, there is something beyond which he has looked at. The other thing I wanted to know from you, and I thought on page 31, where you speak about, and before earlier in the chapter, you speak about the colonial historic period, and you talk about the famine, and you talk of the challenges and the difficulties. I thought were very beautifully done. But on page 31, you bring out a table 1.1, where you bring in the economic performance in the Nehru area and you compare 1900 to 46, 47, and then you compare 50 to 64. Therein, you show that nearly 4 times the growth has taken place when it comes to the primary sector, the secondary sector, the tertiary, the GDP. GDP per capita growth rate 0.1 in the earlier 50 years and 1.9 in the next 15 years. And then, of course, population growth at 0.8 earlier and 2 point later. So I was wondering if you would like to share something on this.
Absolutely, Charan. Before I do that, I want to just point out what makes me make that comment about Nehru's knowledge of agriculture. All of this comes out from the selected speeches of Jawaharlal Nehru, which are brought out by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, where he speaks very often about agriculture, and which is where this comparison of yields in India vis-a-vis yields in the rest of the world is made. So he was very concerned, he was knowledgeable, and there's this very famous famous line of his, anything can wait but agriculture. So there's no doubt that he was very conscious of the fact that India must be self-sufficient in food production. And the year in which he died, which is 1963-64, there was a tremendous increase in agricultural and food production. However, it was followed by 2 years of consecutive drought, as you know, which brought India almost to its heels. But that is the point about Nehru and knowledge of agriculture. Now, I want to make a small corrective here and say that table 1.1 is not mine, Charan, but it is the table from probably the best known Indian, or anyway, any kind of national income historian of India, an economist by the name of S. Shiva Subramanian, who's no longer here, and who did this work as part of his PhD thesis in the Delhi School of Economics in the mid-1960s. So it is a table from his book that I have presented, which I've cited, of course, at the bottom of the table. And yes, it does show a tremendous improvement in agricultural production. And as for per capita income, you're absolutely right. I just want the increase in per capita income is extremely high. And I just want to say that the increase in per capita income would have been higher if the population growth had not increased so much. Right? I make that comment. You can look at that. If you look at the table, you'll see that. Had the population growth remained at the at the levels, at the rate at which it was during the Raj, the per capita income growth would have been much higher. And I just want to conclude with a small point. Generally, increases in the rate of growth of population is also somewhat of an indirect reflection of living conditions in a country, right? After all, in the Malthusian world, population doesn't grow, right? Population doesn't grow because of food shortage and famine, etc. The fact that population itself surges after 1947 is somewhere, I would just say somewhere, a reflection of the improvement in living conditions in India. So that's what I would like to say about the table. And I just want to complete by saying, in Shiva Subramaniam's calculations or estimates, per capita income during the Raj is 0.1%, as you pointed out. But interestingly enough, in the estimates of the British national income statistician Angus Maddison, who of course has provided data on growth across the world over centuries, per capita income in the last half century of the Raj actually declines mildly. It is negative. Anyway, the simple point being, there is a tremendous increase in per capita income during the what I call the Nehru era compared to the last 50 years of the Raj. Yes.
I was very happy to read about the momentous neglect that you have written in your book. And therein, you bring in the aspects of education. Let me read. In fact, as observed by the historian Romila Thapar, the political class does not particularly want an educated population, as the educated tend to ask inconvenient questions of their rulers. Further on, you mentioned India invested in machines but failed to do so sufficiently in the humans who would work them. Now, this I found a very strong statement. And why I say that is because many people have claimed that the IITs and IIMs came up at that time, or IITs at least came up at that time in the All India Institute. On the other hand, as the title goes, from Nehru to Modi, Modi in his very first term had asked Professor Kasturi Rangan, and the new education policy is in front of us right now. So my thoughts were, Professor, when you write that he neglected education, what precisely did you have in mind?
So I would say two things. One is, of course, very easy to see evidence of, which is that by global standards, the public expenditure on education is one of the lowest. And it actually shows up in table 5.1 of the final chapter. In fact, we spend less, not very much less, but less than even the subgrouping sub-Saharan Africa. And this is data from the World Bank, which conveniently gives us these regional groupings. India is the major country, the only major country which spends less in sub-Saharan Africa. So historically, throughout, and there is no major difference in that even since 2014, the expenditure on education is lower than the global average. It's lower than that of even countries which have lower per capita income than us, which of course sub-Saharan Africa does. So we can't really say this has to do with our income levels. It is somewhere the priority of our policymakers or even of our country. And the other thing that I want to say, of course, it is correct that the IITs represent really a very high class of education by global standards. Nevertheless, one might say that we probably biased our expenditure a little towards higher education rather than schooling. And evidence of that I give throughout the book. I think especially in chapter 3, where I have this quotation from two World Bank economists, Michel Ribot and somebody by the name of Tang, T-A-N-G, which says that actually in 2005, India had as much illiteracy as China had in 1970. So generally, the issue of illiteracy and school leaving, etc., we haven't paid enough attention to. And the IITs, I don't think, are a sufficient substitute for that. So that's what I meant about, yeah. And I do discuss a little bit about what can I say, to what extent you can blame Nehru for the neglect in the 1950s, etc. That's discussed. But yeah, I would think it's a momentous neglect because we ended up with far too little education levels in school compared to countries which have really made progress, whether it is today's democratic East Asian countries or communist China. Compared to all of them, we have invested less in schooling, excuse me. Yeah, to be precise.
One thing I liked, Professor, was your comments, and I feel we Indian economists, including myself, I'm an economist by training, we sometimes don't stand up and talk what is right. And I read from page 51. India's economists, whether they supported or opposed the economic policy of the time, chose to give undue importance to tariffs, subsidies, and government regulations. The very intervention that Russian thinkers of the 19th century had considered of secondary importance to the industrialization when compared to education. So I think we as economists could have done and contributed significantly better at that point of time.
I think that's right. I think that's absolutely correct.
Now let's move on.
Charan, if I may stop you, you did read out correctly from our book, but I just want to say that point about tariffs and subsidies, interesting enough, the very terminology is used by Russian economists of the 19th century, that you shouldn't too much focus on tariffs and subsidies.
Exactly.
All of that matters less than schooling.
Right.
For productivity of a country. Yeah.
So, moving on, we had the droughts, and when Mrs. Gandhi comes as the prime minister, there are two deficits, as you discuss in the book. There's a deficit on food, and there's a foreign exchange deficit. And then you explain and tell us the visit she made to America. And
Correct.
then you also tell us, and I think that was quite a bit of learning for me myself, that the seeds of the Green Revolution was there even before. And it's not that she just plugged it and brought it in. And I thought that was very good. One more thing I would like to have your views other than if you want to tell us something more about the story of Green Revolution, your comment on chanting socialism but planting capitalism. And I think that's the turning point which is taking place because she does away with the private purses, and then she also brings in and uses the Gribi Hatao in a very big way. But then you have a statement here. The reason, of course, and you're discussing in detail, why was India not in the same tent when it was not hostile to the Western parts? The reason, of course, was that both Nehru and Indira Gandhi were always suspicious of capitalism, or at least of the dominance of private capital. Now, this point of private capital you bring in various chapters. And Madam Nirmala Sitharaman, in one of our interactions with the industrialists recently, as I read it, was asking, why is private investment not coming? I've made the environment so conducive, but you are letting the government down in a way. So this idea of private capital really right in the beginning of the book, I thought you brought in very well, but I was wondering if you want to tell us something more about these two.
Sure. Thank you, Charan. If I may just stop for a minute and say I've participated in many discussions of my book, but I've never had my host read my book so carefully. I'm really impressed, I must say.
Thank you.
I'm really impressed, Charan. I wouldn't be able to do a job like this. All right. So now the point that you started with, I just want to say the subheading from which you read out, chanting socialism, planting capitalism, is not meant in any sarcastic way at all. It is just a statement of that time and referring to the fact that the Green Revolution was a really, a large, the largest players, the farmers, were private entrepreneurs. There's no question about that. But the point about this chanting socialism and planting capitalism is also to say that Indira Gandhi was a very pragmatic politician. She was authoritarian without doubt, but I think it would be correct to say that she did have the interests of India foremost in her mind. I have no doubt about that, especially vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And this thing about the visit to the US and what reached her finally, President Johnson's comment, send food to India by the shipload so that she's kept on a short leash, I'm sure must have stung her. And she played a very important role in the Green Revolution. But I think it should be important to say that so did Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri. And we all know his, his slogan, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan. And as you correctly point out, that was not necessarily only Nehru, but from the 1950s itself, India's politicians were exhorting people to grow more food. So there was a concern about the food levels in the country, food production in relation to population, even before Indira Gandhi. But Indira Gandhi certainly gave it a thrust and, went at it wholeheartedly. And within a matter of years, we were self-sufficient in food. And I think that is really what changed everything, including the terms at which India faced the rest of the world. Yeah, we no longer had to, if I may use a strong word, beg for food. We were independent in a way that we hadn't been for a long time. So yeah, and I also want to conclude by saying among the photographs of that period is an extraordinary photograph of Indira Gandhi speaking to the farmers just outside Delhi. I don't know whether it's probably where I'm located right now in Sonipat in Haryana, it's possible, and talking to them about their role in the Green Revolution, etc. And so that was a tremendous political initiative. And I just want to conclude by saying that, of course, today we realize that there was an ecological underside to the whole policy package, the draining of the underground water supply, yeah, the aquifers, the dropping of the water table, a procurement policy which would take up whatever it is produced by farmers. And we only yesterday there was a feature in the 9 o'clock news about several million tons of food rotting in Haryana in the food department. So all of those were our mistakes in our food policy, which need to be addressed and rectified. But the Green Revolution was a major event. It was probably the turning point, and Mrs. Gandhi was an important player in that. There is absolutely no question about that whatsoever.
You know, I like the way you mentioned it. I had never imagined Green Revolution, and I've been educated in Punjab for some years.
Exactly.
That it is, I always thought it's very indigenous, but on page 74, the way you mention it, you bring in the Rockefeller Foundation and the wheat and Norman Ernest Borlaug, of course, comes in. But this language, the Green Revolution in India, must be recognized as a great international collaboration. Untouched by the politics of the Cold War, then raging white hot. If there ever was a challenge to the hubris of overweening chauvinistic nationalism, it was posed by India's Green Revolution. India's self-reliance in food was achieved through international support. So I really like the way that the Green Revolution is being seen in a different context, which many of us students of economics had not really realized. I would also like to move on and therein talk about the short period that Rajiv Gandhi came in. Now, Rajiv Gandhi himself is a technocrat in the sense he's a pilot exposed to the rest of the world, knows the technology, knows the benefits of technology, and obviously is trying to have technology missions and brings in Sam Petroda. And through it, they have the telecommunication revolution, or at least the infrastructure of the telecommunication revolution that took place, and brings in the telephone kiosks. Now, I remember very clearly people calling from those kiosks to anywhere in the world. And that was very interesting. So I looked at this development as a seed that was sown in. And that's how I say the giants grow on the shoulders of their predecessors. The Jam Trinity, which later on brought in financial inclusion through Jandan in a big way, and the mobile telephones come in. So I look at the seeds of Jam Trinity in that time. So in the long economic history of our country, how would you visualize Rahul Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi's story of telecommunication revolution, the kiosks, and use of technology? Of course, that technology which you mentioned, and that's the second point if you would like to dwell upon, wherein you say the industrialization investment is taking place now, but the private investment is taking place in the MSME sector as we started calling it in present times. So I think that's a very good point which you brought in, saying that yes, and that also brings in the story of the animal spirits, which was used extensively later by Manmohan Singh Narsimha regime. And your conclusion that Rajiv Gandhi brings in that bullishness and the animal spirit and then brings in technology. If you would like to reflect on some of these and tell us briefly about your thoughts in this or your research in this.
Charan, of course, it is such a wide range of issues. I'm not sure I'll be able to do justice to your to the leads that you've given me. You may, of course, correct me if I don't respond sufficiently. But I just want to make a quick point about a concluding comment on the international aspect of the Green Revolution. I just want to mention that India is now giving back to the rest of the world. In terms of agriculture, I don't just mean the export of food to many countries, but actually one of the important plant breeders globally is a person of Indian origin whose name is Kush. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. Kush. He's a scientist from Punjab who spent about the past 50 years, I think, outside India. And he's one of the preeminent plant breeders of the world, associated with one of these multilateral research institutions. So in a sense, India gained from the rest of the world. India is now participating in the global food revolution. And I think we should really feel very proud about that. Now, about the Rajiv Gandhi era, everything you mentioned is absolutely correct. I just want to make a small addition to what you said. Of course, it is a marvel that it was a marvel for us in the 1980s to go into a kiosk and make a call anywhere in the world. But I would say that actually, in terms of practical consequences, Charan, the real thing was that the average Indian migrant could make a call to his native village, to his family, from an urban area where he was probably a manual laborer away from the home. So the impact it had on individuals, their sense of well-being, and also business for communication. We seem to have underestimated seriously the role of telephones. And yes, the Pitroda revolution is telecom revolution is absolutely important. But I also want to say something which is in the book, but you may not have noticed. The central element in the software services supply model that India is now riding was laid in the Rajiv Gandhi era. Interestingly, very early in his tenure in 1985. And what is that? That is Texas Instruments in Bangalore being allowed to set up a satellite in their premises for them to communicate with their headquarters in the United States. And that is what gave the idea of this business model being located in India, but supplying services globally, initially to the United States. And that happened in the very first 6 months, if I'm not mistaken, or certainly in the very first year, probably the year of Rajiv Gandhi. And one of the interesting asides is that the satellite arrived in the Texas Instruments office in Bangalore on
in a bullock cart. In a bullock cart.
Absolutely. And
I liked it. I liked it when I read it.
Absolutely. You should see the photograph sometime, Charan. It's a very beautiful photograph.
I lived in Bangalore, and I think they should put that photograph somewhere in the town hall of Bangalore.
They should. Absolutely. It is such an important moment in India's history. It's such an important moment. Now, and the final thing that I want to say about animal spirits, it's kind of interesting about these animal spirits. Now, I don't want to bring an academic discussion to this, to academic element to this discussion, but you are no doubt familiar with the work of Roderick and Subramanian, right? It's a very famous paper whereby they try and explain why the economy begins to grow faster since the late 1970s after Mrs. Gandhi returns, and they don't quite use the term, but they're referring to animal spirits broadly, that her return made the private sector more enthusiastic, etc., because she changed her attitude towards them. But the interesting thing is that you don't observe much rise in corporate investment at that time. But on the other hand, you see corporate investment booming from the very year Rajiv Gandhi comes into power and remains high more or less towards the end of his tenure. And something which people don't know, in his last year in power, which would be 89-90, would that be right, Charan? Or is it, 89-90, I think. A GDP growth in India hits close to 9%. People don't know it. So this 9% thing actually happens even then. And had we not had the balance of payments crisis of 1991, and had Rajiv Gandhi returned to power, we don't know what the history of India may have looked like. And I just want to conclude by saying, and that is what I spent a lot of time on, there is a sense that Rajiv Gandhi was overtly obsessed with technology, etc. It may or may not have been true, but he started those 5 so-called missions, which were given the name technology mission. That's probably suggests his obsession. But interestingly enough, they were on non-technology issues, which are so fundamental: literacy, oil seeds, communication, which of course is electronics and technology, and drinking water. And the 5th one escapes me. It's in the book. And if you think of it, those are fantastic. It's a fantastic mindset that India should, in a mission mode, go into the production of oil seeds, right? And to think
those 5 are telecommunications,
correct,
drinking water and water management,
yes,
literacy, immunization, dairy, and oil.
Yes. What is the 4th? Dairy.
Dairy and oil seeds, and literacy and immunization.
Absolutely. And where is the technology obsession in it? No, nothing. It's about the most fundamental needs of Indians. And I think in many ways he was a politician who had a tremendous sense of what the country needed. Of course, some of his political moves may have had negative consequences for the evolution of India's polity, but that's a different issue. On the economy, there is no doubt that he was a very important figure.
I think we all remember the era from 1991 on.
Correct.
We were young and mature. We have our own thoughts and judgments on it. And I think you summarized, this is a very difficult task to summarize, means something which we don't know, it's knowledge for us, but something which we've lived through and we know about it, and then writing on it is really skill and art. And I must tell you that chapter which you've written is very well, it captures many things. What I especially liked there was the unwinding of the industrial policy, and wherein you bring in the story of the center and the states and say, look, Why did it really not show results? Well, there was a challenge and the states were not able to, or there's a little difference up there. The other thing I liked it in the chapter, and I like that observation that you made is very good. And that is to do with the point that you're making that whatever reforms we took place, there has not been a foreign exchange shortage since then.
Correct.
And
Correct.
that gives us, you see, every day in the newspapers, we are so alert now.
Yes.
We know the RBI has used so many millions to in the foreign exchange market.
Correct.
All that is coming from the reserves that we had started building at that point of time.
In
I
a
really
sense, yes.
appreciate the way
Yes.
you brought it in. Now, right in the beginning of the book, you had mentioned about it, and now I think this is the right time to talk a little bit about, and that is about poverty. Because when we said the whole objective of reforms, the whole objective of growth is basically to handle poverty. Now, while Nehruvian era did speak about agriculture and that took care of it, Indira Gandhi directly hit it by calling it Garibi Hatao, and that got her many election positive results. But then the story of poverty comes in a big way, and you have discussed it. So, would you like to talk about it? Because you mentioned in this section that poverty reduction had started in the 80s and from 83 onwards. And then you show that as the period unveiled, and as uncovered, you find the poverty ratios and the figures that you discuss are mind boggling. The way they have been brought down from 2004-5 to 2009-10 and 2011-12, that's the last time we had the poverty figures. You would probably like to share a thought on that briefly, of course. And then I really like the way you wrote about the great disappointment. In the great disappointment, you're talking about all these reforms took place, but manufacturing ended up with that same slot of 18 to 20% and didn't develop. Rather, services took over. Would you like to share a few thoughts about it?
Okay, thank you, Charan. Again, a very broad range, but I appreciate how carefully you read the book. In fact, I'm impressed. On poverty, let me just say that there are two things. There was no major reduction in poverty in the Nehru era. That we must say. Though a lot of people believe that poverty increased, probably the most authoritative work on that is the work of Montek Singh Ahluwalia, which I've quoted, by the way, you may or may not have noticed. It is a World Bank study in 1978, which says that, I think his exact words is that there is no distinct trend in poverty in the 1950s, which is broadly the Nehru era. Poverty fluctuated along with food prices. Mainly because food price is a large part of the price index, right? And poverty in India is measured in terms of the calorific intake that income makes possible. So that's so much of the 1950s. Now, one thing which people are not sufficiently aware of, though Mrs. Gandhi's, and I talk about it, Mrs. Gandhi, some of Mrs. Gandhi's policies towards the corporate sector were in her early days extremely hostile. In general, poverty begins to decline in India. The first major dent on poverty is late 1960s. And this again is work coming out of the World Bank, which shows that. So I've deliberately used external sources to cast light on this. This is the work of the poverty researchers Martin Ravalion and Gaurav Dutt. And they have another Indian author called Rinku Murgai, who's with the World Bank. And I've shown the graph. Sorry, I haven't shown the graph. I've referred to it. It's a paper in the American Journal of Agricultural Economics. The first major dent in poverty happens in the late 60s. So it's kind of interesting. Mrs. Gandhi was not just sloganeering when she was saying Garibi Hatao. Poverty was beginning to decline, and throughout the 1970s, it declines. But the fact is that it declines at too slow a pace, right? That is the point. Not that it didn't decline, it declines. And then, of course, in the 1980s, obviously a combination of fast growth of the economy as a whole and also the agricultural sector, poverty growth begins to accelerate. So that's roughly what I say. And of course, the mind-boggling figures which you referred are, of course, from the official Planning Commission study by Rangarajan. Those are not my estimates. So that's in the public domain. Yes. Poverty begins to decline, but I just want to say, unlike the claim, poverty begins to decline quite a bit before 1991. And in fact, the poverty decline begins to accelerate. And this is once again data from the Planning Commission's work. Now, on the reforms of 1991, I would say you're right in observing that I said it is correct. Whatever disappointments we may have had about the reforms, there is no doubt that India has not had a balance of payments crisis since 1991. And that is a tremendous achievement. It's partly due to the reforms and partly also, I suspect, much better foreign exchange management than in the past. I suspect. I mean, I haven't studied that very carefully. Now, the so-called disappointment is with respect to the manufacturing sector. I suspect by and large, we would all agree that the reforms were focused were trade and industrial policy reforms. I think that would be correct, right? And some macroeconomic reforms. The trade policy reforms being lowering of the tariff rate, the industrial policy reform being notably abolition of licensing, right? So that is a very, very big reform. And there's some other reforms also. I don't want to go into it now. Unfortunately, some aspects of labor reform, which I believe strongly should have happened, which didn't happen. But yes, it has made all the reforms were mostly focused on trade and industry. But manufacturing, though it grew, it's not correct to say manufacturing didn't grow. Manufacturing share of the economy didn't grow very much. And that is important. And we now know that the reforms of 1991 were largely influenced by the history of East Asia, not necessarily China, but East Asia. And if there is something that really stands out in the case of East Asia, is their manufacturing success. And clearly the reformers did probably imagine that we would also grow similarly. We didn't. Manufacturing grew. And the other thing that I want to say also, which is a matter of great satisfaction, the quality of products has improved dramatically, right? The quality and range of consumer goods. Apart from Bose speakers, I'm not sure there's anything we need to buy from the rest of the world now. Almost everything here is, and the Bose speakers and the Mercedes, I suppose, everything else is really produced in India. And it's a pretty good quality. And the reforms, again, have enabled that. And it speaks of the very high capabilities in India. We must recognize that. So once again, though the range of goods improved and the quality improved dramatically, manufacturing share of the economy barely budged. And I just wish to say that both governments, it is clear that both the UPA and the NDA and now the Narendra Modi government certainly want a higher share of manufacturing in the economy. The National Manufacturing Competitiveness Council, you know that is under the UPA, actually specifies a share of 25% of GDP for manufacturing. And so does Make in India actually specified. The share is about 17% or something now, depending on whether you measure it in nominal prices or real price, or real or nominal. It doesn't really matter. It varies slightly, but it is well below 20%. And that is a bit of a disappointment. And we need to look at the reasons for that, I would say. But also, I also want to say, you brought this up in an earlier point. In all of this, unlike the 1950s, one thing which is very different especially since 1991, etc., it is not the same government in the center and the states. Right now, it's almost the case, but for a long period, it has not. So it is not so clear whether the center's policies would really find full acceptance in the states, and the states will do as much for those policies which are coming out from the center, whether it's manufacturing or anything else.
On page 45, you bring about the story of Montek, which he did at the World Bank during the 1950s.
Correct.
I really liked the conclusion, and I thought it was very logical, where he said, what we observe is a pattern of fluctuation.
Right.
With the incidence of poverty falling in periods of good agriculture performance,
Correct.
when most of the Indians were in the rural area, and I
Correct.
think agriculture still provides that wherewithal and support, the spinal cord
Absolutely.
support,
Yeah.
and rising in periods of poor performance.
Correct.
It was
Absolutely.
so logical, and I thought for a
It
country
is
in 50s.
correct. I would say that it is both insightful and very professional.
Yes.
On a topic which people tend to be a bit polemical, etc. But it's a very clear statement and based on evidence.
So we are based on evidence, and I would have expected that. Now, moving on, we come on to the latest regime that we have from 2014.
Right.
And you have devoted quite a bit of your book on that. And I would say rightly so. And you have been very transparent. And I like the analysis that you made. The country is very complex, and you have discussed issues like demonetization, which is very interesting and in detail. According to you, the Modi government is pursuing basically the macroeconomic framework of fiscal consolidation and inflation target. And as luck would have it, COVID challenged both of them. And now the aggressive reversal of the cycle, which is led by the US Fed and led for the
Charan, led by the what?
US Fed.
Yes.
American Fed. And basically trying to correct their own follies, which started in the subprime crisis. And the country like India has to take the brunt. You also talk about, and I think it's a must read for everybody, where you discuss about the multiple indicator approach. And I thought that's very good. So my question to you would be, in this section, you do speak about the unconvinced investor. And this is the point I made in the beginning.
Correct.
When the Finance Minister, Madam Nirmala Sitharaman, is saying, what is happening? Why are you not investing? I've done everything to make it conducive. So if you would like to tell us something more about it, and why is the private investment not rising? That is which I thought very interesting. The other thing which you discuss in your book, and I think I myself feel, and I'm a great optimist about India, and I know it'll bounce back. But Make in India, the Make in India sometimes gives me a feeling, what is happening? Why? And this is connected with the previous one, where the Prime Minister is putting lots of emphasis on Make in India, and the private sector is not investing. So if you would like to share your thoughts on these two.
Thank you, Charan. I just wanted to say that my point that if you were to characterize the Modi government's economic policy, I would characterize it as an emphasis on macroeconomic stability, reflected in low inflation and a low budget deficit. And that really, what's the right word now, is applicable to the first term. By the second term, quite early in the second term, COVID took over. A lot of this was thrown out of kilter. Now, I generally argue that however valuable macroeconomic stability is, that by itself cannot guarantee private investment. Unlike what some of the champions of macroeconomic stability, somebody I quote quite a bit, Stanley Fischer, right? I quote his work. He was a kind of guru in the IMF about 20 years later, and he was a big champion of this. I don't really take that view too seriously. However, important low inflation and low budget deficits may be, that by itself will not guarantee private investment and growth. That will guarantee macroeconomic stability, but that will not guarantee growth. The impulses for growth must be there. And I want to say that in India, there is no doubt that the revival of private investment, which is more or less stuck from its about 2013 figure, hasn't budged for almost a decade now, at 32%, 31, 32% of GDP. Investment as a whole, private investment is a little less. Um, that um, private investments must revive because private investment is about 75% of total investment. So unless private investment revives, we're not going to have a revival of investment and sustained growth. Now, all that I can say is that one of the reasons why private investment is not reviving is probably the private sector does not see great potential, great growth in the near future. And that could be a variety of reasons. One, because it believes that the government itself probably is holding back public investment to some extent because it believes so much in fiscal consolidation or rising inequality, of which we have some evidence. It means that the market is not expanding fast enough. So there is no doubt that the private sector does not seem convinced about the immediate future prospects of the economy. That's all I can say. And in the context, the only solution to this is greater public investment, even if some of the fiscal consolidation, in particular the fiscal deficit targets, will have to be broken or will not be achieved in the near future. And now that the government seems to have recognized. And from the last budget, if I'm not mistaken, the increase in capital investment by the central government is 25%. It is historic and very high. And I think it's the right way to go. But I suspect it may have to be maintained for some time before we can expect the public sector to revive. So I would just say, like a lot of people saying that the Reserve Bank must stay its course to bring down inflation, I'm not personally very convinced that actually monetary policy can arrest food price inflation. But anyway, that is a statement. Similarly, I would say that I would think that the central government's capital expenditure thrust probably will have to be maintained for some time, 3 or 4 decades. Sorry, I apologize, 3 or 4 years, half a decade before private investment revives. That's all I wish to say. And finally, I would say now this is seen as a political point, and it is something which we can learn from history. I just want to say some of Miss Indira Gandhi's policies towards the corporate sector were toxic. And I'm referring in particular to the raids on the by central agencies, etc. And we saw immediately corporate investment in India collapse. It actually collapsed in the late 60s. That's a word, mid to late 60s. And it's directly related to Indira Gandhi's policies. And I just wish to say, while the finance minister is correct, the corporate tax rate has been lowered, and very substantially. The corporate tax rate in India is now comparable with the tax rate in the United States. Apart from the fact that the private sector is a bit skeptical of the prospects of the economy in the near future, some of this use of central agencies to pursue alleged tax violations, I think will have a chilling effect. And I think that's a wrong thing to do. We should use information technology to do that. We shouldn't be using, I think, so heavily visible approaches to trying to unearth financial irregularities, etc. That can also have an impact on private investment. And I just want to say, finally, there is some suggestion. I haven't researched it, but it's in the public domain, and it should be looked at. There's also some suggestion that the Inspector Raj may have been given a new lease of life with GST inspections. Now, I don't know how far that's true, but I think we need to work very hard that financial irregularities must be checked, and the penalty must be very, very high. But should we criminalize this one? And should we empower an unaccountable government machinery to pursue defaulters? That I'm not so sure. I think there should be strong penalty, but you don't want to kill the goose that lays the eggs. So I think you should be careful about that. And finally, Charan, I have an article on Monday, the 10th of October, on Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's challenge to the private sector, which says, do you, like Hanuman, have to be reminded of your strength? And what I say is, unlike Hanuman, who is devoted to his Lord Ram, the private sector is just chasing profits, right? That's his job. So if it doesn't see a major revival of profits in the future, it's unlikely to commit private investment. That's all I wish to say.
I would nationalize them.
You would sorry?
If they do not, if they can't chase the profit and they can't go for social welfare, they probably need to be nationalized.
That might be a bit extreme, Charan, but anyway. But no, Charan, let me say, but something which we can do, roll back the tax cut. Roll it back. I'm serious.
I agree with you.
There's nothing wrong with that at all. If that has been given to them for...
And they're not rising to the occasion, then why should the public exchequer continue to suffer?
You're 100% correct. Roll it back. Roll it back. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. I wanted to read the summary which you made, and I thought it was very good because I totally identify with it. 3 policy moves by the Modi government indicate what it imagined are elements of a desirable architecture for the economy, namely a digital payments network that would replace cash linked with demonetization, a unified indirect tax regime, the GST, and less government, where right in the beginning, the Modi government did say that we will give you maximum governance, but minimum government. So I think this is a very good summary of the Modi regime. I must also mention 2 things which you have discussed in your book, and you have discussed partially right now. One is the Modi government's emphasis on toilets. And I think they're very important because they take the issue of public health leaps and bounds ahead. And for me, the mortality rate of children, especially the children mortality rate, infant mortality rate, to a great extent can be addressed if there's proper hygiene and public and the toilet, the initiation of public health through the toilet system is a step in that direction. I also feel next step is not to have those open drainages in villages and towns because that could probably compromise on hygienic conditions. So once you have a toilet in a house and open drainages stop, I'm sure it's going to have a direct impact on infant mortality. I hope somebody in the government thinks of the second component and takes the Prime Minister's initiative a step ahead. The other thing I wanted to mention, you have covered it partially in your book on page 197. You talk of fiscal restraint is not always prudent. And I think that's a great contribution as an economist. And the finance minister rightly, transparently declared what the gross fiscal deficit is. Rather than covering it here and there or camouflaging it, which was being done for many years, I really appreciate the courage which the present regime showed and said, look, we know what the fiscal deficit is. This is our transparent figure. And while the rest of the world can correct it, we are also on the process of fiscal consolidation. Now that brings me to the unfinished journey that as a country we have. Now you have covered a very vast canvas. In your book, you actually start from the British era and then you bring into the independence and from the independence to the planning commission and you've covered a very vast canvas and then you flag, and I think you flagged some of the very important issues in your unfinished agenda. Education, of course, is one. Health is another. We have discussed about it. But Professor, regional variation is still another, which we understand as an economist. But 2 things which you have brought in, I thought were very important, and I would like to have your thoughts on it before we close for the day. One is gender. And at the IMF in recent times, there's so much of research undertaken that if there's gender parity and female labor force participation in India improves, we could make substantially high progress in our GDP. The other thing which you have just brought in, and of late, there has been a political economy discussion at length with thought leaders and social transformers saying the Varna and the caste system should be left aside if India has to progress. You bring that in. So you bring it gender and you bring in the imprint of caste. Do you want to share some thoughts about it?
Absolutely. Charan, I appreciate your having read this section so carefully. On gender, I mean, even before gender, let me mention very clearly your point about Swachh Bharat, which I regret I don't cover very much, partly because of my obsession to back everything with evidence, which can get to be a bit of a vice sometimes. And the evidence on Swachh Bharat is not so easy to provide compared to macroeconomic data. Though we have some evidence of toilets provided, there are some questions raised about are they functional because there's water supply exists, etc. But there is no doubt that it is a fundamental intervention and it should have been done 75 years ago. So there is no doubt that Narendra Modi personally was very right in recognizing that as a very important intervention. But I just want to say a small thing, and you're 100% right about it will have an impact on child mortality. But before child mortality, it will also have an impact on women, on mothers, because of indoor toilets enhancing their security, hygienic conditions, ensuring that the water is not contaminated. One of the things, and I provide evidence for that in the final chapter, which you refer to, over 50% of women in some parts of India are anemic. And that has to do with malnourishment and etc., etc. And somehow, if you drink contaminated water, however good the food that you're eating, you don't get the best out of it. So it's a whole package, and clean water is a large part of the story. And once women are anemic, one of the major forces for the transmission of technology, I'm not even using words like literacy, technology in the country is what's the right word, is stunted or crimped, because women are overwhelmingly responsible as mothers for bringing up children. If women are anemic and in poor health, one of the forces for the expansion of technology in the country is immediately affected. So healthy women with agency referring to having some autonomy in their private and public spheres, are fundamentally important. So that's why gender matters. Now, however, on gender, I can't help saying, and that's why I've spent so much time on it, not just gender, for democracy itself to work, it seems to me you need a certain social transformation to occur. And what is the social transformation we're referring to? One where the old elites are now forced to accommodate the demands of the larger part of the population. And I refer to the human development and social indicators, or economic and social indicators in the South and the West being better than the North and the East, except possibly the far Northeast, which anyway is in a sense an outlier because their social structure was a little different from the rest of India. It was mostly tribal. There's greater equality in those societies. Anyway, the South and the West show higher income, but before higher per capita income, they also show superior socio-economic indicators. Now, before they show superior social economic indicators, there's also the social transformation that I'm talking about, whereby the old hierarchical structures have been dislodged in some sense. Now, this is a very long-term process. It happens over half a century. I've discussed two states, Kerala and Tamil Nadu, to some extent, but believe that is what accounts for the regional differentiation, Charan. Otherwise, we are hard put to explain it. UP, Bihar, and Madhya Pradesh probably are, in terms of natural resources, richer than Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Water for a start, arable land, mineral wealth in Bihar. These are wealthier societies in terms of natural resources. Why should their human development indicators be worse, even though broadly we have the same political system, which is democracy, and broadly we have the same laws? At least the central laws are identical. The state laws are not widely different from one another. So that's a point that I want to make. And caste, the final point that I want to say on caste, yes, caste will require some specific interventions which target caste. But here I just want to say politically, and I just refer to that. I make this comparison between Kerala and Tamil Nadu. I don't know if you noticed it. Tamil Nadu historically, at least for the past half century, has adopted what may be correctly described as caste-based political mobilization. Kerala has adopted what you may call socio-democratic political mobilization, which does not emphasize caste distinctions as much as class distinctions. And it's kind of interesting, on every major social indicator, the scheduled castes of Kerala are better off than the scheduled castes of Tamil Nadu. This is not to decry Tamil Nadu in any way or to in any way glorify the Kerala model. Kerala has serious trouble with it. I mean, the unemployment rate is very high. The per capita income in Kerala is maintained by huge migration of Indians or Malayalis to the Gulf, where they have to work under very difficult, in fact, unacceptable conditions very often. And also there's severe destruction of the natural environment in Kerala. And finally, despite very good gender indicators on health, when it comes to gender in political participation or in governance, Kerala is one of the worst states in the country. Worst. It's kind of interesting, and I provided data for that. And this is despite the fact that women participate in elections as much as men. The percentage of women who vote in Kerala is higher than the percentage of men who vote in Kerala. But women are hardly represented in parliament, hardly represented as judges, and not parliament, as legislators, etc., or even maybe in high office in the government machinery. So I just want to finish with this. Yes, gender and caste are important, but we should address them, in my view, in a social democratic way. I'm not somebody who glorifies identity politics. Neither do I believe that identity politics is essential. To an extent, Kerala shows that there are very straightforward interventions which would bring about broad equality and raise the levels of historically disadvantaged groups. Yeah.
I would mention that in the book, the way you handled corruption, especially when it comes to demonetization, very balanced approach. In a society where corruption is enmeshed and efforts are being made that corruption is minimized, but you and me know that it raises its head over and over again. As an economist, we know black economy has been a major challenge. And I think since the last 60 years, I remember Vanchu committee and how many committees were set up to understand and estimate the unaccounted economy. And despite that, it raises its head again and again.
Absolutely.
And then the society accepts it. And the way you mentioned about it, saying that the political system, the political funding, and the election probably has to pay some thought to it. I remember Arun Jaitley, the finance minister, at one point of time came out with political bonds so that election bonds. Election could be more
Correct.
cleaner. But I
Correct.
think that is one challenge going
Yes.
forward, an
Yes.
unfinished journey that I think
Absolutely.
we
But-
need to look at.
Correct.
And also-
Transparent funding, right, Charan? Transparent funding of political parties and elections.
And at the end of the day, when will we be a clean society? A society which doesn't have to bribe its way to live the way it wants to live. And that is why I like this conclusion on page 237 in the last paragraph. To put it positively, citizens give themselves a democratic form of government mainly to ensure that they have access to the goods. And I want to add, without any corrupt practices.
Absolutely. Governance is one of those goods, Charan? Governance is one of, not just roads and bridges, but also governance. You want the governance which you believe you deserve. Sorry.
Yes. So here, to put it positively, citizens give themselves a democratic form of government mainly to ensure that they have access to the goods, public and private, that allow them to lead the lives that they value. And this is where I would say, if we can bring in a corruption-free, a bribe-free society, I think that's one unfinished agenda that
Absolutely.
I think would improve all of us.
Absolutely. And I may have mentioned it, but now that you've raised it, Charan, maybe I should have given this more attention than I did in the book. But as a macroeconomist, I do have this vice that I I want to back everything I do with data. That's a bad thing. But what do? You need a historian or political scientist also to study India, I think, and bring all of this in a discursive way rather than in this heavy data-based approach, which I tend to be partial towards. Yeah.
I agree with you. Means we economists, at least in the last two generations, have now started becoming too quantified.
Exactly.
Or without a data, we are not able
Yes.
to carry on our discussion. I
Yes,
totally agree.
exactly. That's unfortunate, but yeah, we're in that trap.
Yeah, we are in that trap. But I like the way that you had interspersed your book with very few tables. And most of the discussion was qualitative. And I thought, okay, like Adam Smith, like David Ricardo, we are back to the time when we discuss trends threadbare rather than, and I'm very happy to see that you did not invoke any of the econometric techniques that you in your otherwise research are very capable, and you do it extensively in your research on manufacturing and other things. So
Charan,
very happy.
except in one place, and very importantly in chapter 1, maybe I don't discuss it sufficiently, but the representation of growth path and chart 101 is done on the basis of a very, I wouldn't say sophisticated, but very state-of-the-art econometric method where the breakpoints are estimated rather than chosen by me as a researcher.
Yes, and that table is really, that chart is fabulous. Where you talk from 1900.
I played it down a little too much. Maybe I should have emphasized it a little more.
But
I
that's
didn't want to get too technical too early on in the discussion. Yeah.
And I thought it was very well done. It was very well done. Okay, so with that, I think we have had a very interesting discussion on the book. It is 6:23. I know we had sought 1 hour from you, and we have shot it by 23 minutes without even taking your permission. If there is any one single question which the participants, there have been about 115 participants today, amongst the best discussions we have had. If any one of the participants or two participants, would you be okay if we extended by another 6 minutes?
Absolutely. Charan, may I ask you a very quick question before that?
Yeah.
May I ask you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say that, if all my interlocutors were as generous, life would be very easy for me. But it's not just a generosity. I'm struck by how carefully you have read the book, which is just astounding, absolutely astounding. But I just want to really, for my sake, get you to tell me, honestly and frankly, what in your view is missing in the book?
Well, honestly speaking,
let
if
me
you
put it
have to,
diplomatically for you,
yeah,
or make it easier for you. What would you have liked to see, which
you
is
know,
missing?
you know that you have called it a brief history, and a brief history. The first book I read on a brief history was by Ken Wilber, who is
Uh-huh.
the New York Times editor, right? The
Right,
famous Ken
right.
Wilber. Now, what I found in Ken Wilber, and to a great extent I found in your book, that you are able to strike a chord with the reader. And that's why I was very happy when I said and I observed that you did not engage me too much into data.
Except in the Modi chapter, which
No,
being so current, I use quite a lot of it. Otherwise, no, you're right.
even in the last chapter. So
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
okay.
Right.
You do bring in various, that's okay. But it was interspersed, sprinkled with very less data. On the other hand, so I was very happy with that. On the other hand, you did bring in the philosophical background into the book, where you have tapped the philosophers and you've tapped Amrita Sen, and that's very good. But what I was, and this is a brief history in 240 pages, to capture 100 to 150 years of history is not easy. And you've done a great job on that. Because like each one of us brings a baggage and comfort zone. I have worked extensively in the financial sector,
Right.
and I would have loved to see a little more discussion on the financial sector. And why I tell you that
Very
is,
little. Very, you're right. Absolutely.
and,
There's very
and
little of it.
why I tell you that is, this book seems rightly so heavy on the real sector, but
You're
very
right.
light on the financial sector.
You're right, Charan. I agree.
And
I agree.
and that is okay, because I lived in the financial sector and I am of the belief that the financial sector provides oxygen to the rest of the sectors
True.
to thrive
True.
and breathe healthy.
True. You're
So
absolutely right.
the changes we brought in the financial sector from 1991, and therein the role of thinkers like Bimal Jalan, like Y.V. Reddy, like Dr. C. Rangarajan, unparalleled, unparalleled. And I would have loved at least a page or two dedicated to the research of these stalwarts, especially when we have passed through a very difficult great recession period, which doesn't seem to come to an end, which started in 2008. And the role of Reddy in that can never be undermined. So, but other than that, I think it's a great book. I just loved reading it. And I must thank you for capturing so much wisdom in in just about 240 pages. Very well written.
Thank you, Charan. The absence of the financial sector has to do with my competences. I know very little about it, but I will try and make up for that. And now, in what remains of my professional life, try and see how this can be incorporated. But I think you're right. I'm pretty much silent on it. I don't have enough to say on it, and I need to think about it very seriously. Why it is important and how it can be brought into the analysis. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm going to take three questions. One
Sure.
is from Ashok Vishandas, who is my
Yes.
colleague on the board of our foundation.
Yes.
One is from Swapnil Soni, and
Yes.
one is from Aisha Siddiqui.
Okay. All
So
right.
I'm requesting each of the three speakers to be very brief in their questions. And I'm requesting Professor Pulapre Balakrishnan, depending on the time that he has, the floor is his. I am open till midnight. So, so first, Professor Vishandas.
Sir, you're muted. Sir, you're muted, no?
Ashok?
He's now unmuted. Are they? Oi, oi, oi. Charan, can you send Professor Vishnudas a message?
Ashok, you are still muted. We can't hear you. Okay, while he is switching on and off, I'll then, just to save time, I'll go to Swapnil Soni and then come back to Professor Ashok Vishan.
Yes.
We can't listen. No. Do you want to type the question? I can read the question for you.
Can he hear us?
I think he can. In the meantime, Swapnil, do you want to go ahead? I thought you had a question. Swapnil Soni. No. Okay.
No.
Then Aisha Siddiqa, do you want to go ahead? Hi, Aisha Siddiqa, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Everybody's probably formed pessimistic priors about whether they will get time and got away.
Yeah,
get a cup of coffee or something.
No, but I can see them. They are there.
Yeah,
but probably they're, and they had raised their hand. That's how
I noticed that, especially Aisha Siddiqa.
Yeah. So, okay, that's all right. Let me go back to Dr. Ashok Vishandas.
Yeah. Please, he's speaking so much, I feel very bad.
Yeah. Ashok, we can't hear you.
Can you type a message, Charan?
Yeah, I can read it then.
Or type a message to him, I mean. Really unfortunate.
I think he'll just fix it. He's typing it now.
Right.
In the meantime, Swapnil Soni, are you back? If you are, you can ask your question. And Aisha Siddiqa, if you are back, you can ask your question. Murli, do you want to ask a question?
Charan, I'm really enjoying the discussions you had with Dr. Pulapre Balakrishnan. I'm really thankful for the insight you have shown. And Dr. Pulapre Balakrishnan has talked about the growth of economy from the period of early period of independence, Nehru period, and other Prime Minister Modi period. I want to ask a simple question. In whose period as Prime Minister the economy has grown and public welfare has been felt by the common man?
You'll be surprised, sir. Of course, it was a very long tenure of about 14 years. But the time when poverty really begins to decline and decline quite rapidly, interestingly, is the period when Indira Gandhi was a prime minister, which is 1983, which is when there is accelerated increase. Then, of course, it begins to decline again when Dr. Manmohan Singh is prime minister. But the acceleration starts in Indira Gandhi's time. The rate of growth was lower than it is now, without doubt, but it accelerated, and poverty decline accelerated in that time. The credit cannot entirely go to Indira Gandhi. The Green Revolution was a large part of it, and some of the thrust, and certainly the thinking and the thrust itself had started before she comes into power. Some of the interventions in the Nehru era begin to bear fruit 10 to 15 years later when she became into power. But it was in her time when actually poverty begins to decline at an accelerated rate. There is no doubt about it. And the Green Revolution takes place. That you cannot get away from the fact, though there are flaws in her time, the emergency and The private corporate sector was probably unnecessarily harassed. And very interestingly, there is no major thrust on health or education in Indira Gandhi's time. There is not. But the economy certainly begins to perform better. And she has some role in it. There's no doubt about that. So that's what I would say. But, sir, I generally, I'm not somebody who spends too much time who did better. And unfortunately, the title of the book leads everybody to focus so much on Nehru was the I don't think we should spend time on that. I think we should understand the economy first before we worry about all these things, who did better, etc., etc. Though I, of course, have my personal views, and they're very strong views, and they're not hidden. Yeah. So to answer your question,
thank you, Professor. I got one more question, one last question.
Mr. Muralidharan, please.
You are mentioning about when compared to the resources availability in Tamil Nadu and Kerala.
I didn't say resources.
Much lower.
Yeah. I did. Sorry. Yes.
The resources availability, natural resources availability in Tamil Nadu and Kerala is much lower than Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh.
Mr. Muralidharan, I didn't say much lower, but are probably very likely lower. Yes, carry on.
When that is lower and it is higher in these three states.
Correct.
Why there was lack of growth, economic growth, or what is the basic reason why these people were had a stunted growth?
Mr. Muralidharan, excellent question. And it's a question that we in India should be asking all the time, instead of constantly focusing on India versus China or India versus the United States. We should be looking at India within ourselves, within India. And the answer is very, very simple. Dr. Charan Singh referred to Piketty, or am I referring to Piketty? There is a wonderful line in Piketty's most recent book, Charan, which is just a summary of his larger work. Thankfully, it's only about 200 pages long. The rest is over 1,000 pages long. It's called a brief history of equality. Equality, not inequality. He's trying to say what is leading to the world becoming more equal. There's no doubt, world is more equal than it was 150 years ago. About that, and so he's taking a long run view. And there is this wonderful line. He says, education, and that is publicly provided education, is the single most important factor in equality, i.e. bringing about equality, and what's the word? And the force that he uses, force for development. I might use the word for growth, but he's used development. But that sums it up perfectly. And Mr. Muralidharan, it's easy to see these states have spent less on human development than Kerala and Tamil Nadu. It's as simple as that. There's nothing more to that. And I must
very interesting.
I must thank Charan, because it's only when discussing with him that this thought came to my head. If you think of it, UP, Bihar, MP probably have more natural resources than Kerala and Tamil Nadu, which are very dry states. Especially Tamil Nadu has a water problem, which is very serious. So yeah, so that is the answer to your question, Ms. Muralidharan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Balakrishnan. The most surprising thing is the prime ministers have, come out of only Uttar Pradesh, through and through, and still the state was lagging behind in growth.
So that is the point. You see, there can be very major differences between the elite and the rest of the population. You know what I mean? The UP had an elite which was highly educated, but the mass of the population was not. And an economy cannot grow if the mass of the population is not, right? They must know how to use machines. They must know how to undertake certain activities which increase their productivity. If they're not educated, they can't do that.
That's right. That's fantastic. So much of input that you have given, I'm enlightened by the discussions Dr. Charan had with you, and your presentation on this thing, your coverage in the book, and your knowledge is astounding. I'm awe-inspiring, and it's a wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed. Thank you so
sir.
much. My
Thank you. That's
hats
very
off to
generous.
you.
That is very generous of you. Thank you.
I'm going to ask
Thank you so
Professor
much.
Ashok Vishandas once again to attempt.
Sure.
Professor Vishandas.
Professor Vishandas has sent in his question, Charan. Did you see it? I saw it.
Yes. Yeah, he has
But
sent.
we'll try and get him to speak.
Yeah, Professor Vishandas, can you attempt once again, unmute and speak? No, not coming.
How unfortunate.
Maybe
Really?
then, Professor Pulapre, you can read the question. The
Yeah.
last question is differentials in income levels of farmers and non-farm increasing in recent times? And then I think he has sent one more question.
Will you read them? I'll try and do both at the same time.
Okay, I'm trying to read the other one. He said he has sent two questions. Is there any association between corruption and economic development?
Yes, that's a very good.
Yeah.
So two questions.
Professor Vishandas, can you at least hear us? Can you hear me speak now? Yeah, I'm very sorry that you had to speak so many times and we couldn't hear you. I apologize, but at least you can hear us. Now, on your first question that I can't really answer because I don't really know enough, but there is certainly some truth in the fact. Well, it is believable that the incomes of the richest farmers is not growing at the same rate as the profits of the private corporate sector. I think that's probably true. I can't really tell you more than that because I don't know, but I suspect that is the case. The private corporate sector is minuscule, but it seems to be doing rather well, thank you. Especially during the COVID. Interestingly enough, as you know, its profits have zoomed, na? Because there are no, your fixed costs are lower. You don't have to rent premises, etc., etc. But the best corporates through online marketing were able to, maintain their revenues while costs decline. Because employees are not coming into work, fixed costs are lower. So especially in recent years, I have reason to believe that the incomes of the richest Indians, which is broadly the people who are plugged into corporate profits, their incomes are rising, but that of the richest farmers is not rising at the same rate. But this is a hunch, sir. I can't really. Now, on corruption, again, this is a hunch, but I do believe strongly it can. Now, there are various kinds of corruption in dictatorships, as you had in East Asia during the rise of the East Asian countries. It is entirely possible that the dictators were corrupt in the sense that well, corrupt is a difficult word, but they certainly received payment from the industrial sector, industrialists, if you wish. But their legitimacy was based on providing growth to these economies. So they did everything possible to keep growth up. Now, in India, where the corruption is coming possibly from the bureaucracy, that to the lower bureaucracy and not the politicians, a bureaucracy which is completely unaccountable. Completely unaccountable. It is a colonial bureaucracy and you can't hold it back. There, I believe, unaccountable, and therefore their position is not vulnerable in any way. Underperformance is not checked. There is no penalty for not doing anything, which you can do. There, it can certainly hold back development and growth, even when there is no corruption. There could be bureaucrats who are not corrupt, but they have no incentive to deliver anything. And that was the whole colonial practice, right? After 1858, anyway. Before that, I guess they had to deliver high land revenues. After 1858, they didn't even particularly have to do that. There was an army, British Indian Army, and all this was happening automatically. So we are really working with something which can be described as a colonial bureaucracy. And we are paying a very, very high price for that. I don't know how we can change it.
So I would like to add to what Professor you have mentioned right now, because you have
Yes.
discussed it so well in your book. There's a good amount of recent research which has come out, which shows that corruption distorts priorities.
Yes.
And because it distorts priorities, then whose priority is right? Is it the priority of the elected representatives
Correct.
who are sitting in the parliament?
Correct.
Or is it the priority of a rich individual or an individual who has suddenly become rich and can change the priority at the cost of someone else?
Correct.
So because it distorts priorities, the development agenda need not be a priority for the individual who's changing it or who has
Correct.
the power to influence it.
Correct.
So therefore, it has somewhat, it disrupts development. The second is empirical evidence. During the license Raj, it was so well known that the priorities can be changed by the lobbyists and the licenses can preempt production because you would
Correct.
ask licenses for larger volumes of production and don't do it so that the prices are kept at a certain high level and you have already competed others out because you have cornered all the licenses. Again, it disrupts priorities and disrupts development. So the latest research which has been coming out from the IMF shows that countries which are able to bring in transparency even in lobbying activities to a great extent are able to develop faster. So
Yeah.
that is
Charan, can I respond very quickly and then we take the last question? What
Sure.
you said is absolutely correct. But I just want to say one thing. Ultimately, there is no substitute for good or sound economic policies. Yeah, and I just want to say, Kerala is a state where the level of unemployment is very high, and as I said, a very large number of unemployment in Kerala youth is over 25% or something, which is just
and
incredible.
persistent.
And persistent, exactly correct. But it's also kind of interesting that Kerala is ranked by the international body, and it is significant that it's an international body because it is not influenced by Indian political forces or political and social forces in India. The body Transparency International, which you know of, I'm sure, ranks Kerala as the state that has the least corruption in India. So all that I wish to say, corruption is problematic, but ultimately what probably matters more is good economic policies. Without good economic policies, it is possible that with no corruption, you still don't develop. And it is possible, as the East Asian example has shown, with corruption in dictatorships could also grow quite fast. So there is no formula, but as Charan read out or interpreted the statement in my book, the last chapter of my book, we don't want corruption because we will have faster growth, because we don't want corruption because our right as citizens of this country is being violated, right? That is why we don't want corruption. Am I making myself clear? You see what I mean? That is our right to be governed in a way that is, that is not corrupt, in a way that is in priorities with democratic priorities, what has been arrived at by the legislative process. And I just want to finish Charan, this part, this question. I don't know if you read my quote from Rajiv Gandhi, which was an eye-opener to me. I think everybody should read it. A young Prime Minister of India who presented that to his party. Of course, I'm sure it has been provided to him by his colleagues, and I suspect I know who it is. It's a very well-spoken gentleman who lives in Delhi. He's quite old now because he's Rajiv Gandhi's contemporary. But I think it is just extraordinary in its insight, and he's speaking about the bureaucracy in India, right? And he's not even, that's a point, he's not speaking so much about corruption, but that the bureaucracy is just unaccountable. That's not a word that he uses, but that is what the gist of his statement is. And if anybody has that book, my book with them, I'd like to request them to please spend 5 minutes reading that section. And it's unfortunate that Rajiv Gandhi died young, because if there's any politician who could have probably made some kind of difference in that, it was Rajiv Gandhi, I think. He had the confidence to do that and to speak about it so openly that the bureaucracy in India was holding India back.
Would you say that he had the confidence, or would you say that, and I think like this, because of the 400 people that he had in the parliament?
Correct.
Yeah, but then was it that everybody knew, like he is new to the system, and he could get away by bringing in some thoughts, and then of course he belonged to the family.
Of course.
So I wasn't very. You have mentioned it in your book that he died young, and had he been there, probably we would have been on a different trajectory. But then I would have also interpreted it as if was there longer, and now he did not have the majority of 400 or the emotional advantage of the 84, he would have been by that time tamed by the forces and brought him into the central force, which is the continuum.
Yeah. Charan, I don't know. That is speculation, and I don't want to, I don't have expertise in that, and I don't want to. But I just want to say that at the same time, it is possible that if he were to come back, even if he had a lower majority, he would have been a much more chastened man. He would have something which is invaluable in leaders. He would have had, what's the right word? He would have had experience, and that and greater knowledge of India and how India works. And I think that could have made a difference. But yeah, all this is speculation, and I just referred to Rajiv Gandhi here to say that I thought his statement on the bureaucracy, which is quite brave to say that on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the Congress Party's celebrations in Mumbai, was just outstanding as an understanding of India, really, in my view.
I agree with you. And what I'm saying probably could be, you're very right. As an economist, how would you know and how would you interpret how would the second term would be? I totally agree.
Yeah.
There's a good question. I thought it is worth your attention. And I thought we should probably take it if time permits you. How foreign capital and national policies go ahead with minimal cash in the vista of economic development during the era of Modi economics? I thought it was a good question.
Charan, you're going to have to paraphrase it for me, yaar. I mean, I don't quite understand that. Maybe just read it out once more, please.
Yeah. What I think is he's saying, you have talked about Make in India and emphasis on domestic production. But what he's saying that Modi is also attempting to bring in foreign capital, which you discuss in your book.
Correct.
And you say that right in the beginning, he met the international investors.
Correct.
So I think this question is trying to ask you, how do you bring the two together? And so let me read it again. How foreign capital and national policies go ahead with minimal clash in the vista of economic development during the era of Modinomics.
Yeah, I don't believe that I mean, unlike a lot of people who are ideologically against foreign capital, I don't have a problem really with foreign capital personally. Let me make it very clear. So my point is really somewhat of a mechanical response to this the person who raised this question. I'm not sure for the foreign capital, like the private corporate sector, is pursuing its own profits, but that can have benefits for India. I saw it is important to welcome foreign capital, and Narendra Modi has done quite well on this score. I just want to say two things. Generally, thus far, foreign capital as a share of total investment in the economy is very, very, very low. I think it's the highest. It was something like 7 or 8%. To think that it can make such a difference, I think would be wrong. And secondly, some observers have been talking about saying that much of this foreign investment is coming into India via private equity. And private equity is now, I don't know enough finance, Charan, only you can really figure this out. Private investment is just buying up brownfield projects or brownfield assets, for want of a better word. They are not leading to greater, what can I say, increase in the capital assets of the country. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. But this is my view on foreign capital. And generally, I don't know of any country which has just welcomed foreign capital, but not had very good and strong domestic policies. A country would be Singapore, which has high foreign capital, but Singapore has also had.
Could I ask one question?
Very, very major government policies, strong local government policies. So that's my answer to Charan. I just want to say maybe we'll have to slowly wind up. It's coming to 7.
Absolutely.
Can I?
Absolutely.
But I just want to say the person Ayesha Siddiqa had raised her hand, and you had told her, said that she would be the third speaker. If she's still here, we could listen to her. Otherwise, we could take whoever you as my host.
We'll take 2 more questions. One is from Sivaram. Sivaram, please go ahead.
Yes,
and in the meantime, if she is there, welcome. Otherwise, she has written the question. I'll search and read.
Okay, right.
Sir.
Yeah, please, Sivaram.
Could I? Sir, Amartya Sen overemphasized.
Why don't you also come on your video, Mr. Shivram, so that we can also see you, if you're happy to do that.
Okay, sir.
It drives me crazy when my students refuse to reveal their face during online classes.
It is.
That doesn't matter. If you can't come on,
nobody
carry on. You just have to turn your video on, right? But you don't have to.
It is not opening, sir. It is not opening. That's why.
Okay, that's when you just tell us what you think. Yeah.
Sir, Amartya Sen overemphasized about Kerala and female education. But what is the influence of female education in Kerala in case of women participation in politics or in higher positions, sir?
That's correct. As Charan pointed out, I have a section on gender, a small brief section in the final chapter, where I mentioned this particularly about Kerala, where women have very high development indicators, but have very low presence in governance. So, increasing human development or having human development is one thing, but getting rid of patriarchal attitudes is altogether another. And in all issues of liberation, whether it was the Indian national movement in 1947, or whether it was the feminist movement in the United States in the 1970s, or the movement of Black people in the United States in the 1960s, some part of the transformation comes from agency, right? Those who have been historically behind or victimized must also show some agency. So harsh as this may sound on my part, I would hope that the women of Kerala also show some agency. They must also protest. They must also ask for their rightful share. It's not going to be just done for them by political parties. And our assessment of Kerala also must seriously be tempered by some of the things that we are seeing of late. You've been reading about the murders there by occult practitioners, etc. last week. It is just shocking. It's absolutely shocking, isn't it? You know what I'm referring to, right? It's been in the newspapers very prominently. and it's very disturbing. So Kerala's development trajectory is not all all praise, or it's not only to be praised. There, you must be very critical in your assessment. But what it shows is that it is possible to bring about human development within the laws that govern India. That it shows very clearly. Yeah. So there is nothing inevitable in India about the very low development indicators in the Indian heartland that can be changed through the political process.
Okay, sir.
There is a, I don't know, Aisha, I can't see, but there's a good question from Anandu, and he's asking, and this will be our last question. And the question is leakages. Haven't they reduced post-jam Trinity? Further, isn't it because of good steps of the government during the COVID times, the government was able to transfer huge aid to poor and promote welfare? So my understanding is he's talking about the leakages and the minimization of leakages that happened, as Professor, you were referring to probably the bureaucracy, and that they were not getting, if as Rajiv Gandhi had put it, that they sent 100 and at the end of the pipe only 15 reached the last person.
Correct. Correct.
So I think it is in that context Anandu is asking this question.
I think that's absolutely correct. And I think there's some estimates have been made. I don't know, I don't follow it as closely, but I think it's a very important thing to follow. The direct beneficiary transfer, right? Direct benefit transfer, DBT, yes. Right, Charan? I think it has been pointed out that that it has made a difference. And I might even go to the extent by saying that once the crisis passes, I don't see why we can't do direct benefit transfer, even in the PDS. At least it will avoid this terrible sights which we had on 9 o'clock news yesterday of wheat rotting in Haryana's food department silos, rotting openly. And this is not a new thing. We've known of this for years now. And it's a combination of very clumsy government procedures where people don't want to be seen as selling stocks, even if they're old, because then they could be hauled up on grounds of bringing about financial loss to the exchequer, etc., etc. So not only has DBT been shown to be quite effective, I personally believe it should be extended even to the public distribution system. It will not only lead to what Charan is saying, ensuring that actually the benefit is transferred, as opposed to the possibility that people are denied this in the ration shops, but it will also end the need to stock food in such a big way, which is just rotting, which is a crime and a huge loss to the exchequer. But a loss to the exchequer for which nobody can be faulted, because legally you've adopted all the right procedures. You see you see what I'm trying to say? I mean, we should really also think about the laws by which we are governed, which are, yeah, right.
So, you know, the exact statement that Rajiv Gandhi had made, and I think technology played a role in trying to plug it, is this is expressed in his observation, quote unquote, quote, only about 15 paise of a rupee of a public expenditure actually reaches the intended beneficiary.
Correct.
Now, this is the statement which Rajiv Gandhi made, and this was made somewhere
85, 86, yeah, maybe
85 or so, early days of his.
Correct.
And then the technology was brought in that would have plugged it. And I agree with you, the DBT is one of those. And the leakages is exactly what is happening extensively in the public distribution system.
Right.
And that needs to be plugged. I totally agree with you. And this is open acknowledgement of the leakages in the welfare schemes.
Right, absolutely.
And this was, of course, then, as you mentioned, quoted by the judge in the Supreme Court.
Correct.
In the verdict on July 20, 2021.
Absolutely right.
That has been extensively used. Okay,
absolutely.
That brings us to the close of the session. It's been 2 hours, more than 2 hours. We had planned for 60 minutes. but the discussion was so rich and the interest was so large that even now we have only answered 2 of the, I think, 20 listed questions. So thank you very much, Professor. This
Thank
has
you,
been a
Charan.
very
Thank you
interesting
very much.
discussion.
And to all your other guests who've
Yes.
been so good and stayed for so long, thank you very much. I learned a great deal from this participation. And to Professor Vishnu Das, thank you, sir, to your organization, which you head, for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
So next week, we are having Professor Maurice Sebastian, who was earlier at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, for nearly 3 decades, and is now at the Goa Institute of Management Studies. He has written a book on macroeconomics, international macroeconomics, and he's going to be speaking to us next Friday around the same time, 5 to 6 p.m. I'd like all of you to please join and participate in that discussion. Once again, thanks to all of you for today's participation and enriching the discussion by asking questions or making observations. Thank you and see you next week. Bye.